When a vindictive and ideologically driven judge attempts to humiliate actor and humanitarian Jonathan Roumie during sworn testimony, he assumes complete control over the proceedings. But what the judge didn't count on was Roumie's unwavering presence and the truth that would dismantle every facade he had built. What unfolded in that federal courtroom wasn't just a clash of facts, it was a moral reckoning, a confrontation between spiritual strength and corrupt power. It started like any other morning in the marble halls of the federal courthouse, but something in the air felt heavy. The moment Chief Justice Raymond Leo Burke entered the courtroom, his presence carried an icy hostility. "Remove that phone from my chambers," he growled to his assistant, who fumbled nervously and nearly dropped it. Without pause, Burke barked again, "And notify the defense counsel. If they're not seated in 60 seconds, I'll issue a citation myself." The gallery murmured under breath. Burke's reputation for unforgiving rulings and open disdain for cultural reformers had long been feared. But lately, his behavior had spiraled, especially in cases involving those he saw as threats to traditional religious hierarchy. A court officer stepped forward, hesitating. "Your Honor, Mr. Roumie has arrived to testify." Burke's face tightened instantly. "How fortunate for us," he muttered with venom, making no effort to hide his contempt. "Make sure he understands this isn't a Netflix soundstage or a church retreat. In my courtroom, his acting credentials mean nothing." And yet the air shifted the moment Jonathan Roumie stepped through those heavy doors. He walked with quiet reverence, greeting court staff with grace and dignity. He carried no legal authority, only truth and a calm that refused to bend. Chief Justice Burke's eyes locked onto him, predatory, impatient. His fingers tapped on the bench like a war drum. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. Everyone sensed it. This wasn't a hearing. This was an ambush. Burke leaned forward, his voice low but laced with contempt. "Let's get something straight, Mr. Roumie. Whatever moral high ground you think you represent ends here. In this courtroom, I am law, conscience, and consequence. Do you understand me?" Jonathan looked up, calm, clear. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm here only to speak truthfully. That's all I've ever aimed to do." Burke scoffed, the disdain dripping from every syllable. "We'll see about that." He turned to the defense table, visibly irritated. "Let's proceed with this moral circus, shall we?" The moment the defense attorney began his opening remarks, explaining the philanthropic efforts of Roumie's colleague, Mr. Harrison, Burke cut him off like a blade. "For the record," he barked, "I am beyond tired of this moral grandstanding in my courtroom. This isn't a church confessional. This is a court of law." He glared toward Roumie. "And it's certainly not a stage for religious theatrics." The attorney tried to clarify. "Your Honor, we're simply establishing the background of Mr. Harrison's charitable—" Burke erupted with bitter laughter. "Background? His background is that he's charged with fraud. Spare me the parables." Each time the defense mentioned Harrison's work with families, shelters, or youth centers, Burke dismissed it with growing aggression. "Irrelevant. Continue, and I won't repeat myself." The gavel struck the bench like thunder. Over and over. The stenographer struggled to keep up. The courtroom wasn't a place of order anymore. It was a theater of fear. And then came the turning point. Jonathan Roumie was sworn in. He stood with solemn dignity, posture perfect, voice unwavering. "Stand upright," Burke snapped, despite Jonathan already doing so, "and speak clearly. I won't tolerate vague spiritual rambling." Still, Jonathan didn't flinch. "I can verify Mr. Harrison's financial transparency regarding the American Values Foundation," he said gently. Burke rolled his eyes in theatrical contempt. "Of course. Another sermon about American values. How original." Even the prosecutors shifted in their seats, disturbed by the judge's overt bias. But Burke leaned in further, voice rising. "I've seen wealthy moralists hide their greed behind scripture and charity 1,000 times, he spat. "Your presence here, Mr. Roumie, doesn't impress me. If anything, it makes me question your friend's integrity even more." A quiet murmur moved through the gallery. The veil of neutrality had been shattered. Jonathan Roumie stayed still, graceful, peaceful. Burke's hands trembled slightly as he reached for a folder on his bench, one that seemed to unnerve him. And that's when Roumie delivered his first strike, not with anger, not with theatrics, but with truth. "I have here," he said softly, "documented records of Mr. Harrison's charitable distributions, including detailed minutes from the February board meetings." Burke jolted upright. "Those documents are inadmissible," he snapped, though no one had objected. Silence blanketed the room. The defense attorney stood slowly. "Your Honor, on what legal grounds?" Don't you dare challenge my rulings, Burke thundered, face flushed. One more word and you'll be held in contempt alongside your client. The prosecutor looked down. Even he knew this wasn't law anymore. This was vengeance. Jonathan Roumie spoke, not with anger, not with defiance, but with quiet clarity that carried through the tense air. Your Honor, these documents were submitted properly during the discovery phase, he said, his voice steady and deeply respectful. But Chief Justice Raymond Leo Burke let out a low, bitter chuckle. Oh, were they now? He sneered, lips curled. And I suppose your connections in certain high-minded circles had nothing to do with that little miracle of timing? He leaned forward, his tone sharpening to a dagger. Let me educate you on your kind, Mr. Roumie. You think that just because you play saints on television and speak in churches, you can walk into this courtroom and bend the law around your illusions of virtue. At that, the defense attorney finally stood, voice firm. Objection, Your Honor. That is entirely inappropriate. But before he could finish, Burke slammed the gavel so hard it echoed like a thunderclap through marble and bone. Sit down, he roared. The courtroom fell into a terrifying stillness. Jurors sat frozen, the prosecution paralyzed, the gallery stunned. Something irreversible had just happened. It was no longer Burke's courtroom. It was his undoing. Silence! He bellowed again, pounding the gavel as if trying to force back the truth itself. This is absolutely unacceptable. His face was beet red, sweat glistening on his temples. His breath came in short, angry bursts. But Jonathan Roumie did not so much as blink. His presence was unmoved, like a flame that would not flicker in a storm. I will not be lectured on courtroom conduct, Burke snarled, especially not by some actor-priest hybrid sent here to moralize in my domain. Jonathan, still composed, took a measured breath. Then perhaps, Your Honor, he said gently, we should take a moment to examine the specific details of the February 18th meeting. That name hit Burke like a hammer. His rage vanished, not into calm, but into something else. Fear. The transformation was visible. His jaw clenched. His hands, still gripping the gavel, froze midair. His eyes darted, not to Roumie, but to a single folder on his desk, a folder that hadn't been there yesterday. Those meetings are completely irrelevant to these proceedings, he stammered, suddenly unsure of his own voice. Not relevant? Jonathan asked softly, leaning forward. That's curious, considering those meetings directly addressed the same charitable donations you've deemed inadmissible today. Enough, Burke shouted, slamming both palms onto the bench with such force the wood groaned beneath him. One more word about those meetings, and I will have you physically removed from this courtroom. His voice cracked. The room stared in disbelief. The robe no longer gave him weight. His trembling hands betrayed him. The pages on his desk were now a shield, one that could not protect him. I'm holding you in contempt, Burke hissed, his voice losing rhythm. You think your moral image shields you from consequence? You're nothing but a religious mouthpiece in a tailored jacket. Gasps swept through the gallery. Even the prosecutor shifted, visibly rattled. The court officers glanced at each other uncertainly. Burke was unraveling, and Jonathan Roumie had done nothing but speak softly and carry truth. Jonathan remained still. My profession has no bearing here, Your Honor, he said. But since you brought up protection, perhaps we should discuss the Progressive Justice Foundation's protection payments. Everything changed in that instant. Burke's face lost all color. His jaw twitched. His breath caught mid-chest. What did you just say? He rasped. There were no payments, he added quickly. No guards, no security arrangements. This is slander. Remove this man from my courtroom immediately, he barked. But no one moved. The officers remained frozen, watching the collapse in real time. Jonathan reached calmly into his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. I have here, he said, raising the pages so all could see, banking records, monthly deposits, all from shell companies, each one coinciding with your rulings against faith-based charities and conservative defendants. Shut up, Burke screamed. The cry was not legal, it was primal, the outburst of a man watching his kingdom burn. You have no right, he barked. No authority. I am the law here. Me, not some scripture reciting a puppet with a halo complex. Jonathan raised another sheet. Your signature, he said calmly, appears on the authorization forms. Burke lunged forward, finger trembling in rage. You fabricated those documents. This is a coordinated conspiracy, a conservative attack by... He caught himself, but it was too late. The courtroom gasped. Someone whispered, Did he just say conspiracy? Jonathan's eyes remained locked on Burke's. Conspiracy is an interesting word, Your Honor, especially considering your private meetings with certain activist organizations known for influencing judicial decisions. Burke said nothing. His mouth twitched. His eyes darted to the gallery, to the jury, to the still silent court officers. The truth was no longer knocking at his door. It had entered. Chief Justice Raymond Leo Burke was unraveling a shutdown. His fury no longer judicial but personal, unhinged, feral. "I will not be interrogated in my own courtroom," he thundered, his voice breaking beneath its own weight. "You think you can just walk in here with your sanctimonious smirk and your evidence?" He spat the last word as if it were venom, something profane. But Jonathan Roumie turned the page in his folder with the same reverence one might use in opening a sacred text. "Evidence?" he repeated softly. "Evidence that reveals a deeply disturbing pattern." He looked toward the jury, his gaze not demanding but inviting them into the truth. "Take the Rodriguez case," he said. "A small business owner lost everything because this court refused to admit proof of his charitable work, just like today." Burke burst into a shrill, maniacal laugh. "That conservative fraud, he deserved everything he got," he shouted, saliva forming at the corner of his mouth. "They all deserve it. These people think they can hide behind their so-called patriotic values." The entire room froze. His words echoed like gunshots in a chapel. Even his own clerk paled. Jonathan didn't flinch. Or, he continued with quiet firmness, unfolding another document, "Perhaps we should revisit the Martinez hearing, where you mysteriously sealed all records mere hours after your private meeting with representatives from the Progressive Justice Foundation." Burke's face twitched. His lips parted, but no sound came out. Then reflexively, he tried to recover. How do you know about—" He stopped, realizing the trap, realizing the slip. Jonathan tilted his head slightly. "Know about what, Your Honor? The meeting? Or the $200,000 deposited into your offshore account the very next day?" Burke's entire body stiffened. The gavel in his hand slipped and clattered loudly onto the bench. The prosecutor rose suddenly, now visibly shaken. The jurors exchanged long, deliberate glances. No verdict had been read, but the truth had been heard. Chief Justice Burke had lost more than his temper. He had lost his mask. The gallery erupted in shocked whispers, like a dam breaking. Burke slammed his bench repeatedly, with his palms, desperation flooding through each motion. "Order! Order in my court!" he shrieked. "I will have complete order!" But his voice cracked with panic, not power. "This is all fabricated," he gasped. "A conservative setup, just like the Washington case." Jonathan's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained unshaken. "You mean Mrs. Washington, a grandmother who lost her life savings because you silenced her testimony about where her money came from?" He held up another document. "Interesting how the corporation that sued her donated to your judicial campaign just weeks before." "Shut up!" Burke screamed. All formalities shattered. His robe was disheveled, his hands trembling. "You have no right, no authority. I am the law here. Me!" Jonathan looked up slowly, his expression solemn. "No, Your Honor. You are not the law. You are supposed to serve it." He paused. "Just like the day you took your oath. Ironically, the same day you opened that account in Switzerland." Burke bolted upright, pointing wildly with one hand. "Guards, arrest this man for contempt immediately. Seize those documents, all of them!" His voice cracked again, a man lost in fury, drowning in his own deceit. "What are you waiting for?" he snapped at the court officers. "I gave you an order." But the officers hesitated. Their expressions had changed. They no longer saw a judge. They saw a man. Jonathan remained seated, untouched by the chaos. "Before they do that," he said evenly, "perhaps we should ask why you're so desperate to seize these particular documents." Burke staggered backward behind the bench like a caged animal. "I don't owe you an explanation," he hissed. "I am a federal judge. My decisions are final. My authority is unquestionable." Jonathan leaned back slightly, almost amused. "Unquestionable authority, Your Honor, seems to be a recurring theme with you, like in the Johnson case last week, where you ordered all evidence of your private meeting sealed." Burke froze mid-stride. "How did you—" He stopped himself again. "Those records were supposed to be—" The words died in his throat. "Supposed to be what?" Jonathan asked softly. "Destroyed? Like the Progressive Justice Foundation meeting logs?" "Enough!" Burke bellowed, voice trembling with fury and fear. You self-righteous moralists think you can walk into my courtroom and expose—" He stopped, his breath caught. He'd said too much. Jonathan leaned forward, voice still calm but with an edge of righteous truth. "Expose what, Your Honor? The systematic abuse of judicial power, the targeting of political dissenters, or perhaps the payments you received to ensure those outcomes?" "I said silence!" Burke exploded. He grabbed the gavel again, but instead of striking the bench, he hurled it across the room. It crashed inches from his own clerk, who let out a startled cry. "You want to talk about abuse of power?" Burke shrieked. "I'll show you abuse of power." He turned red with rage. "Officers, cuff him, and anyone who refuses my order will join him in a cell." But no one moved. Not a single badge, not a single hand, because they all saw it now, not just corruption, but a man crumbling beneath the weight of his own lies. The courtroom was eerily silent, so silent that even the sound of Chief Justice Burke's ragged breathing seemed to fill the space. Louder, heavier, more desperate. The court officers still hadn't moved. Their hands hovered, their faces torn between obedience and conscience. Something sacred had shifted. Burke leaned forward, his voice dripping with venom. "Final chance, Mr. Roumie," he snarled. "Hand over those documents and submit to arrest, or I promise you'll never set foot in another federal building again." But Jonathan didn't move. He simply opened another folder, the page turning like a gentle breeze stirring the ashes. "That's an interesting threat, Your Honor," he replied calmly. "Almost identical to what you told Rebecca Chen before you dismissed her civil rights case, right after your private meeting with CEO Marcus Webb." Burke froze. "What? How do you— Webb?" Jonathan continued without raising his voice. "The same Marcus Webb who deposited $300,000 into your Swiss account. The same Webb who hosted that private resort gathering last month, with 6 other judges present, all of whom miraculously ruled in his favor the week after." Burke's hands curled into trembling fists. "You have no right," he shouted, spit flecking from his mouth. "Those records are privileged. Those conversations were private." Jonathan's tone sharpened, not with aggression, but with moral authority. "Private, Yikai?" he asked. "Like the recordings from your chambers?" Burke staggered backward, eyes wide. "What recordings?" he choked. The room inhaled as one. Every juror, every officer, every gallery member held their breath. Jonathan turned his gaze gently toward the clerk's desk. "The ones that," he said, "where you explicitly instructed your clerk to destroy evidence. Evidence that would have cleared 4 innocent people." A gasp cut across the room like a blade. The clerk's hands flew to her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes. "He made me do it," she sobbed suddenly, her voice trembling. He said he'd ruin me if I didn't obey." "Silence!" Burke bellowed, but the command fell limp. His words no longer had weight. His face was blood red. Veins throbbed at his temples. His body trembled under the weight of truth. "None of this is admissible. It's hearsay. It's nonsense. You can't prove—" "Actually," Jonathan said softly, flipping another page. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Your own security cameras recorded the midnight shredding of evidence," he said. "Your own phone captured the threats. Your own signature approved the money transfers." Burke lunged forward, a desperate grasp at survival. "Give me those files," he roared. But before he could reach, a new voice rang out. Clear, firm, final. Order denied. Every head turned. From the back of the courtroom, a team of Justice Department investigators strode down the aisle. Their badges glinted beneath the lights like shields of justice long overdue. The lead investigator's voice echoed without hesitation. "This courtroom is now under federal investigation." He locked eyes with Burke. "Raymond Leo Burke, remain exactly where you are." Burke's breath caught. You can't do this," he stammered. I have judicial immunity. I have powerful allies. Do you even know who I am?" The lead agent stepped forward, utterly unshaken. "Oh, we know exactly who you are, Your Honor, including your recent dealings with the Progressive Justice Foundation, your hidden offshore accounts, and your targeted rulings designed to silence dissent." Burke's eyes darted around the room, walls, windows, exits. A trapped animal searching for a way out, but there was none. "This is a setup," he shrieked. "A religious ambush, an actor's stunt, a conservative plot." Jonathan spoke again, softly but firmly. "No, Your Honor. The only plot here was your systematic abuse of power." He took a step forward. "Every biased ruling, every closed-door deal, every soul you crushed beneath your gavel. It all ends today. Burke pointed a trembling finger toward him. This was all you. You orchestrated this. You and your holy posse of church-loving, scripture-quoting zealots. You set me up. Jonathan's gaze didn't waver. No, Your Honor, you set yourself up. He stepped closer, his tone quiet but absolute. We merely gave you enough rope. Your own words, your own rage, and your own conscience did the rest. And in that sacred stillness, the courtroom felt something it hadn't in years: justice. The federal investigators approached the bench, their presence resolute, but Chief Justice Raymond Leo Burke wasn't done fighting. I am a federal judge, he shrieked, voice cracking beneath the weight of desperation. You can't arrest me. I am the law. I am the law. The agents moved quickly as Burke attempted a final lunge toward his chambers, like a drowning man reaching for a ghost of control. You don't understand, he shouted as they restrained him. They made me do it. The foundation, they have leverage on everyone. If I talk now, the lead investigator narrowed his eyes. That's interesting, he said calmly. Tell us more about this foundation, Your Honor. Burke's mouth clamped shut. His survival instinct finally caught up with his unraveling mind. He froze, trembling, cornered, calculating. Then his face twisted into a sneer. I want my lawyer, he hissed. And when this is over, you'll all pay for this humiliation. But Jonathan Roumie stepped forward, utterly unfazed. Speaking of payment, he said softly, producing one final document. Perhaps you'd like to explain these transfer records. Burke's breath caught, his jaw locked. Jonathan lifted the paper high for all to see. 9 federal judges, he said, all receiving identical payments on the same day you did. All of them issuing rulings against faith-based defendants and political dissenters in coordinated cases. Gasps surged across the gallery. This was no longer about one man's fall. This was about a network, a systemic betrayal of justice. Jonathan's voice echoed through the courtroom, steady and unwavering. This evidence suggests a deliberate, organized effort to turn the judicial system into a political weapon. He turned to Burke one last time. But justice, he said, was never meant to be a sword. It was meant to be a shield, to protect all Americans equally. Burke stopped struggling, the fire in his eyes extinguished. The realization had set in. He hadn't just lost his robe, he had lost his legacy. Behind him, court officers sealed his chambers. His clerk, now freely confessing, sobbed as investigators questioned her. He made me do it, she whispered. He said he'd ruin my career if I didn't comply. And so began Raymond Leo Burke's final walk of shame. He was no longer judge, no longer feared, no longer untouchable. He was a man in handcuffs. But just before being let out, he turned to Jonathan Roumie. His voice was hollow, bitter. You think this changes anything? He muttered. There will always be more like me. You can't stop us all. Jonathan met his gaze, unwavering. You're right about one thing, he said gently. There will always be those who abuse power. He paused, then added, but there will also always be those who stand up to them. That, Jonathan concluded, is what makes our justice system work. Not the corruption you tried to make it serve, but the courage of those willing to defend it. The aftermath was swift. Burke's arrest ignited a wave of investigations across state and federal jurisdictions. The web of compromised judges began to collapse, case by case, bribe by bribe, lie by lie. Whistleblowers came forward, clerks, officers, victims, and perhaps the most symbolic moment of all, the Harrison case, the very case Burke tried so hard to bury, was dismissed entirely by a new impartial judge. There had never been any evidence. There had only been a powerful man afraid of the truth. And in the end, justice wasn't delivered by those who tried to control it. It was restored by those willing to defend it. If you believe in truth, integrity, and the courage to stand up, like this video, share it, and subscribe for more powerful stories of justice, redemption, and light overcoming darkness. God bless you, and God bless America.